Welcome to RotoWire TV. I'm Heather Ankeny. He's Chris Liss answering our, this is a fantasy football question actually.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
Expert. Right.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. In the past, traditionally, I have been told, and I have sort of drafted by this rule, not really a rule, look at the guys that came on really strong at the end of last season. Those are the guys that are going to come on really strong in the beginning of the next season. I don't know that I necessarily believe that's true. There's a lot of time in between seasons, and especially if you change teams and whatnot. But do you feel like there is some momentum that carries into the next season?
Sometimes. I mean, it just depends. Okay, whenever you look at how somebody's done, whether it's the end of last season or in the middle of the season, for the last 4 games the guys had, say it's mid-season, it's week 8, and you say, okay, this guy's done really well from week 4 to week 7. Do I think that he's really arrived now? The basis for deciding whether it's for real is looking whether the conditions that obtained during the period in the past are still obtaining in the present,
Okay.
right? Regardless of whether it's last season or even this season. Now, last season's even worse because, as you said, there's a whole offseason, so conditions change. Even though some of the same personnel are back, no team's exactly the same. They're all a year older. Things have happened in their lives. They're just a little bit different, right?
Things have happened in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, they're humans. They're not robots that just produce stats for you, much as we like to see them that way, right? So for instance, I think a couple years ago, before Jamal Charles got hurt, at the end of 2009, he set the record, the NFL record for most yards in the last 4 games of any NFL season.
I had him that year.
At the end of that year when he went crazy, okay? So it was any running back in NFL history, no running back in NFL history had as many yards as Jamal Charles did through the last 4 weeks of 2009. In 2010, he then had a monster year in like 200 carries where he had the highest yards per carry in the NFL since Jim Brown in the 60s. Okay, so basically that was a very good indicator that he was about to just blow up. And of course, Todd Haley, being the idiot that he is, was playing Thomas Jones and giving him way too many carries and costing the Chiefs a lot. Okay, and that was really frustrating, but he still had a big year because he was so efficient per carry. Sometimes, though, it doesn't matter. Sometimes the reason a guy blew up down the stretch is that he played really weak defenses. He was in a bunch of shootouts. And I'll give you an example. Matthew Stafford had a huge run down the stretch. Remember that last game against Green Bay where Matt Flynn threw 500 yards and 6 touchdowns, whatever it was, and so did Matt Stafford.
500 yards, yeah, exactly.
Something crazy like that.
It was ridiculous.
Right. And so that was just a shootout. Green Bay had a terrible pass defense, and they shot it out. And so sometimes, a guy will have, a run because of the game situation. Now, I think, he's still got Calvin Johnson, Matthew Stafford. He's still young. He's still going to get better. But if you look at his, per play stats, 7.6 yards per attempt. The league average is 7.2. It wasn't that far above average. He threw 663 attempts. That's the 3rd most in NFL history. Yeah, he had 5,000 yards, but go ahead and give any decent quarterback 663 attempts, and you're going to get a ton of yards. Just do the math. You just need 8 yards an attempt would have even been higher than Stafford. He didn't even get there. He's 7.6. Eli Manning had more yards per attempt. Tony Romo had more yards per attempt. It's not that, even Kevin Cobb had 7.7 yards per attempt. Okay, I'm not saying he could sustain that over 663 had he not gotten hurt. But, Stafford was a volume guy. He wasn't a per-play guy, and that's even having Calvin Johnson on his team. So I'm not really particularly high on him, and that's an example of a guy who really blew up down the stretch.
So take into account how they did at the end of the season or don't? Or is it just sort of situation-specific as kind of everything is?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you look at it, if the conditions that obtained down the stretch, he didn't play super easy defenses, he wasn't in crazy shootouts, he just played well against reasonably average competition, and he's got most of the same pieces back, whether it's a quarterback or a running back. Yeah, then that's a guy to say, okay, we have to look at those last 4 games and say, this is going to be a good indicator of how he's going to do this season.
Great. Thank you. You heard it here, RotoWire TV. He's the expert, Chris Liss. I'm Heather Ankeny.